Yeah, it might be all quiet on the Kalvin Phillips front, but that doesn't necessarily mean the situation has changed. Manchester City will allow Kalvin Phillips to leave if they get a suitable permanent offer or a loan with an option, and one that obviously appeals to the player himself. Now, it's gone quiet probably for 3 reasons, really. The first is obviously this January schedule. Half the Premier League is on break right now, half the Premier League will be on break next week, and obviously those games are sandwiched between 2 FA Cup matches with a lot of rotation, so there isn't necessarily that need to get Kalvin Phillips into whichever club wants to get him in straight away from the Premier League clubs anyway. So that's option 1. Number 2 is, like you were saying a couple of minutes ago, Kalvin Phillips missed training pretty much all of last week through illness. He wasn't the only Manchester City player to missed the game against Huddersfield as well. So it'd be interesting to see when we see Manchester City train later whether he's out there again. So that's another thing that's probably affected it. And number 3 is the clubs that we've talked about. Obviously, we've talked about 2 clubs being interested, having the most interest, the most concrete interest in this window so far, being Juventus and Newcastle United. Well, reports out of Italy suggesting that Juventus' interest has just gone a little bit quiet, a little bit cold, considering the fees that would potentially bring in Kalvin Phillips on loan, looking at other midfield options. And the second is obviously Newcastle United. And why would Manchester City be in a hurry to let Kalvin Phillips go to Newcastle when they play each other this weekend on Saturday afternoon? So there's 3 variables there, I think, affecting the Kalvin Phillips situation, but the situation still pretty much remains the same. Obviously, look, it's very, very relaxed at Manchester City. It's very, very relaxed with Kalvin Phillips. He is happy here. He's a member of the squad. City are happy to have a senior England international as a backup if they need him later in the window. But like I said, they will let him leave if they get a suitable offer.
Just want to talk about Kalvin Phillips, who you mentioned there and mentioned those links to Newcastle. Does it feel like he needs a move? He needs a move away from Manchester City?
I think yes and no. Yes, because I think as a professional footballer and someone that's gone through his career playing consistently at the highest level and playing the whole way through a season, this has probably been quite a difficult period for him at Manchester City. Yes, he's won pretty much everything, but he hasn't played a part in that. And as a footballer, mentally, it can be quite a struggle if you're not playing and you want to be. It doesn't matter for England. It doesn't matter at all for England. He could be sitting on the bench for Manchester City between now and the summer, and he will be on that plane to Germany, because Gareth Southgate has got a select few players that it doesn't matter if they're playing for their clubs, they're going to be going. Now, one of the reasons for that with Kalvin Phillips, I think, is because England don't have a huge variety of options in that defensive midfield role. You think Declan Rice is probably the only real one, and sometimes you might want Declan Rice playing a little bit higher alongside Jude Bellingham. You might want him as number 8, and Kalvin Phillips is an out-and-out number 6, and you know exactly what you're going to get with him. So in terms of that, for the Euros, he doesn't need to move, but I think personally for him, he probably does.
Yeah, is that what's best for the player from his perspective?
It's up to him. I mean, surely he should want to play. You know, he was so influential in that lead side, and literally got himself to a point where he was really highly talked about, and rightly so. He'd earned all the right plaudits. You know, when England had injuries in the Euros, he stepped in and was arguably one of England's best players. Well, not arguably, he was one of England's best players. Had a fantastic tournament. Then he gets that move to City, and you think he's going to kick on. So for him, he would have stagnated in his career. It's going to be really tough for Kalvin Phillips to, like you say, Olivia, go through this whole spell with hardly playing. So on a personal, I mean, I'm not Kalvin Phillips, but looking out for him, I think he absolutely needs to go and play. But you look at the Premier League and the sort of the clubs that he would want to aspire to be at, and you think, who does he go to where he could start every game? I mean, Liverpool, no. He's already at Manchester City. Arsenal, probably not. Chelsea, no.
Well, does Newcastle make sense then?
Yeah, it's probably the only...
Exactly, Newcastle. But even then, we spoke about it, obviously, with Keith earlier on, about the financial implications of that. But even that, he's not even guaranteed 90 minutes every game at Newcastle when they're all fully fit.
I think, you know, it might be the reason why the foreign market opens up for him and the European market opens up for him. Yeah, we know Juventus hold an interest in Kalvin Phillips. You cannot fault the way that he's gone about everything, Kalvin Phillips. No. He's tried everything. He's worked his socks off, and we know that because Pep Guardiola has told us that. He's even been on the phone to Marcelo Bielsa, his former manager, saying, what do I need to do to impress Pep? You know, Pep's a disciple of Marcelo Bielsa. What do I need to do?
You can impress Pep, but you're behind Rodri.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. I don't think there's anything you can do when you're second fiddle to Rodri.
So I think, you know, he's tried everything. He had opportunities to go in the summer, and he said, I'm going to give this one more go. And I think a lot of people at Manchester City respect that. I think his teammates, he's well liked within the dressing room as well. You know, if there's a it's going to probably sound funny, but if there's a way to fail at a club, this is probably the way to do it. He's not come out and moaned in the media or anything like that. And I think if he goes, he'll go with the respect and the best wishes of Manchester City, and he'll go on to be a great player, because he is a great player.
And also all the things he will have learned. Playing alongside those brilliant players, playing alongside all of them in training. And he will have learnt so much, albeit it hasn't gone the way he wanted it to on the pitch, but off the pitch, I think it will maybe have even made him a better player. He'll have learnt so much and learned like a lot about himself as well that he can take on to whichever club he goes to
next. Tough as a player, isn't it, when you're part of a winning machine, winning things like the treble, but you're, in a way, like you said a minute ago, you're kind of not a real crucial part of that.
You don't feel part of it. That must be a really
bit of a bystander
surreal situation to be in. You've got these medals, or you've been around all the success and all the team photos of the guys who have been an integral part of it. You know, and I know that, you know, that from what Anton says and what you hear in the media and how Pep Guardiola speaks about him, he's a valued member of the group in terms of the team camaraderie and being about the place. He's not an issue, and he's probably got a lot of good friends there. But as a professional, you are there to play. It doesn't matter how good a person you are and the off-field stuff. If you've got friends and you hang out and things like that, when you are at the top level, especially like what Manchester City are, competing for top honours, you don't want to be a bit part player in that squad. And Kalvin Phillips will have aspirations, and absolutely rightly so, should have aspirations to go and be the main man somewhere. But I will just say this at the end: it's so surreal, interesting how things can change so quickly, being so highly thought of and sort of take the pick of the bunch. I remember when sort of Manchester United were linked with him, but with his Leeds connections, he said, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to go to City. And now he's looking at it saying, in the Premier League, at the top end of it, where can I go? Even Villa. You know, even if he was to look, I've just thrown it out there.
Does he start for Villa?
They've got a fantastic midfield, you know, they're settled. It's not an instant he can walk in and go there. So then does he look mid-table? Does he look below that? And it's like, that's where the European market's going to have to come in. So a really tough decision for him to make, for the best step of his career, because he's had such a stagnating 18 months.